We get every voice we can to make sure we make the right decisions, and then we commit wholeheartedly to the decision to give it the best chance to succeed. If we learn new information, we'll change course, but we need people's buy-in and commitment. Now, that's an easy thing to say. It's a hard thing to execute day to day, so you got to roll that down. I mentioned earlier how we even roll our skills or competencies into it. When we defined our leadership skills, and if anybody's out there looking for like really good examples of leadership skills and frameworks, Amazon has an incredible set. I don't agree with all of them, but it's very well articulated. Great reference.
Yo, this is Christian D. Evans with Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our amazing podcast. This is where we reveal the top 1% of business concepts and systems and processes to scale 8 and 9-figure businesses. We interview top-level 8 and 9-figure CEOs, business owners, and amazing TEDx speakers like David Meltzer. We got Nick Cavuto, Pascal Bachman, and so many others. And if you feel like this resonates with you, please share this with your friend, your family, and make sure you impact them as well, because we're trying to spread the message on those that do not know how to scale 8, 9-figure businesses and talking higher level business concepts. So guys, remember, enjoy the episode and be uncommon if you can. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning in to Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. And boy, we have someone special on today. You know, most of us, we want to go out there and scale some amazing businesses. Well, imagine you were able to listen to someone that has exited 4 businesses. He scaled, he grew, and he built it. But now he's conquering this next industry. He is the CEO and founder of Uvaro, the fastest growing tech sales bootcamp in North America. He's a 4-time entrepreneur with multiple successful exits. He's the host of the Seller's Journey podcast, an active early stage investor. My friends, please welcome the one and only Joseph Fung. How you doing today, Joseph?
I'm doing so well, Christian. Oh man, I can't wait for today's conversation. This is going to be a blast.
Well, hey man, I'm really excited about this as well, because one of the things that I know our listeners love are individuals like yourself that have gone through the ups and downs of really deep failures to achieve amazing successes. And not only that, but also, you know, being able to go out there and now just dominate this new venture. But before we dive into all that fun stuff and what you're doing with your Varo, and then as well as just different exit strategies and, you know, how you navigate that, just I'd love to kind of pull back here for a second and talk a little bit about kind of what led you into the entrepreneur route, and then as well as what are some of the biggest lessons from each exit that you have learned throughout your life.
Oh, damn, that's a big question. Oh, I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, I got into this thinking I could do it better than others. I mean, pure arrogance. One of my co-ops, like an internship, big company, military contractor. They got a brand new president. He's visiting the factory. And I'm thinking, cool, I'm going to learn some cool things from him. Maybe I'll bump into him in the hallway and pick his brain. Everybody else was scared. It's like, is he going to close the factory? Is he going to lay us all off? And it just struck me that's a terrible way to build a company. Like, you've got a brand new leader and everyone is scared about the change. And I said, you know what? I could build a better company than that. So that's what got me started. And I haven't looked back. And every single time we focused on building a place where people can do their best work. And that's been that steel cable through every single company I've run. Damn, lessons. Each exit is a different one. Our first, I think, was the most brutally honest lesson, where we started a freemium business. It was open sourced. And we said, you know, we're going to build the company. We're going to monetize it later. You hear all that kind of stuff. You know, a lot of traction. You can figure out the cash flow later. Yeah. And then we tried to do that. And the community just rebelled against it. We tried to activate some paid features, and just the ethos, the dynamic rejected it. We had to turn it into a nonprofit. And it's still going. It's great. It's used on millions of websites out there. But we could not turn that into a profitable business. And then, I mean, I think a lot of the typical bumps and bruises. You can work with friends and family, and sometimes that's a superpower, and sometimes it's a tragic failure. Your board is going to have a big impact on the outcome of your business. And I think, like so many other leaders, culture wins over everything. And we've really honed our craft. My founding team, we've done this a couple of times. We've really honed our game plan on how we deliberately create sustainable cultures so that it's not just all on my shoulders. And I got to say, this last time, kind of going through it, it has been so much easier to do that, because if you're the one carrying that culture flag the whole time, it is tough work.
Let me stop here for a second in regards to the freemium. So
I think this is very applicable, and I'm going to build context around this.
Mm.
What I found so interesting, what you were just saying there, is that I think so many of us culturally, we like to say we never want to fail. We never, or I shouldn't say we never want to fail. We want to learn from our failures, but we never want to quit on the ultimate goal. However, though, you do also, let's be honest, you have to adjust on the path sometimes. So, like you were mentioning, you had to get real with your strategy and say, hey, this is not monetizational, right? And so, my question is, was that easy to accept? And if it was not, how did you start accepting it and say, okay, well, if we can't monetize it, what can we do and turn it into nonprofit? Because I would imagine that that's a slap in the face, definitely when you think, okay, we're going to monetize this. And a lot of entrepreneurs, we have these visions, we have these ideas, we have these things, and sometimes it doesn't go into fruition like we expect, but it does develop into something, but sometimes not always how we want it to.
It's an interesting one because in many ways we are luckier than so many. When you build a company on your own, your primary signal are your customers and your employees. And you could build it up to millions, tens of millions of dollars, and you have dozens, maybe hundreds of employees. But that's only dozens or hundreds. There's only so many data signals there. We built an open source solution. It was used by tens of thousands of developers on hundreds of thousands of websites, and we had a massive, thriving community. And so we had a ton of data signals. And so the moment that we started to turn on some of these levers, you start to see it in things like reviews, comments, engagements, downloads. The data is incontrovertible. And so the easy part was seeing the signal and accepting it because it was just thrown in our face. I think the hard part was accepting how wrong we were about the initial, hypothesis, the idea we could make it free and then turn on monetization later. And like just kind of eating that piece of humble pie was really tough. And then the most agonizing part was that after you make the decision, then you need to follow through with it. It's like, how do we set up the nonprofit? How do we choose the next person? And this whole time, you're putting in all this effort to something you're going to be giving away or shutting down, and putting in that effort to leave the company or the community better than it was is really hard when you've accepted that you need to move on and you're no longer really doing it for yourself or for your next venture. You're just doing it to leave the community better than it was. And that's tough. It's really, really hard.
So what you said there is you had enough data from all your customers and your current clients to identify and say, hey, this is not working, this strategy, so we need to adjust it and just kind of embrace what's already working and develop that platform. I like what you said there. And then also it was difficult. You don't want to put that off to the side. It was difficult to eat that humble pie. So let me ask you, when you're running your business, and I've talked to people that run it, singularly, and some people that have partners. And those that have the successful partners are the ones that really, really scale because you're able to obviously focus on the things that you're really good at. So Joseph, when you come into a company, what would you say are your hats that you like to focus on? Because there's so many different things, definitely when you're starting it, when you're in growth stage, and obviously when you're exiting, there's 1,000 different hats. And I'd love to, from your years of experience, what are the one or two or three hats that you like to wear that you are the best at?
I love the way you phrase that, the things that you're the best at, because that's not always the same as what you enjoy the most. It's and like one of the things I enjoy the most is building the first version of a product. But I'll be plain, I am not a good engineer. I'm really lucky. I've got co-founders who are way better than me because like hack away in the first version of the product, I enjoy that. I am not good at it. So let's not say first developer. Honestly, though, the two areas that I think I do very well is the first customer development, like talking to those first customers. Because any good company is a two-engine plane. You got the work to build the product and ship it, and then the work to sell it. If you don't have both engines working, you don't have a company. And those first conversations with a customer, you learn so much. It's so energizing. And the reality is, if you focus on solving problems, you're kind of going out there being a white knight solving problems. That feels amazing. That's the first one. The second thing, and that's that day 0 to day 100, like that first kind of step. The next part, it's a tough slog. Like getting a company from 0 to a million, from a million to 10, it's a journey. But once you get to the point, where you've got that 50, 100 employees, and now you're working through a team of exceptional leaders, and your focus becomes help those leaders do exceptional work. That's where I really thrive and really enjoy as well, because I've had a chance to learn from a lot of bumps and bruises about building strong cultures, helping people do their best work. And now if I can let other leaders learn from my mistakes and do that work, it's got a huge multiplicative effect. And it's really rewarding seeing people flourish and thrive.
So you were talking a little bit before we jumped on this podcast, and I'm glad you brought this up. So on the front end, when you're working with, and then that might be like the customer success or the onboarding team for those clients, what throughout your journey, right? I think there's always optimization, right? So once you identify what you're really, really amazing at, but there's always ways to improve and optimize that process. So, and I'm going to ask you here in a bit about the culture here, secondly, but the first one would be, what are certain things from the first time you did it to now, obviously, having 4 exit strategies, and then obviously, building an incredible business with Uvaro. So what have you learned throughout that process that you wish you would have learned earlier on?
The two things that stick out to me is how to make humility a real superpower, and then how to look and leverage pain signals. If you get really good at identifying what you're not good at, imagine an inverted stack rank. What are the things you're worst at, all the way down to the things you're best at? And if you start with the things you're worst at and equip others to excel, you're going to get rid of the stuff that you often don't enjoy, or the things that'll hold the company back. And it gives you an amazing list of the people to bring in, and you're going to learn things from them. Even the things that I've been terrible at, like with my first company, finances, payroll, the bookkeeping. Oh man, I was terrible at that. Every company that we've gone through, I've tried to get out of that as fast as possible. And now, not only do we have incredible finance teams, but I'm actually much stronger at it because I've learned how to find the right people. So what's great is it lets me lean into my strengths and kind of get rid of the things that I'm weak at. And it's really liberating to be vulnerable with your team about, here's this thing I'm bad at. I need to find someone to do that better than me. So that feels really good. The second thing on the pain signals, I was very fortunate to have a mentor really early on who totally reframed the way I received negative feedback. I mentioned earlier how we went through that pivot, the free to the paid, and it didn't work. Going through that crisis, one of my mentors shared with me an incredible position that he'd shared. We often talk about Hansen's disease. A lot of people think about it as leprosy. And people don't know, they don't realize that a lot of the root cause is that the infection attacks your nervous system. You don't get pain signals. So you get infections, you burn yourself on the stove, you bump on something short, you cut yourself, and you don't know. And as a result, your body gets infected and wounded, and it can get really terrible. What's broken there isn't the cut or the wound, it's the fact that you didn't get the pain signal, so you can't react. An organization is just like that. Your negative feedback is a pain signal. That means you need to heal it. You need to take care of it. You don't shoot the messenger. You need to embrace that pain signal, because now there's something for your antibodies, your immune system to actually tackle. And so every company since that, I've tried to get better at hunting, finding, and embracing the pain signals, because that's what helps us find where we can improve. And then it keeps things flowing much better. And as a side effect, all the leaders in the organization emulate that pattern. And that's just a much healthier way to build a culture of open feedback.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because I love this concept, because we know that failure is the best learning experience. However, when we know that, how do we optimize that failing experience? And like you said, that pain signal, so that we can obviously move faster and grow out of that instead of just be a linear growth. So what does that look like a little bit? Like, what are questions you ask yourself, or how do you analyze that, or maybe even reframe that or restructure that? Or I just love to unpack that at a deeper level. Like, what do you do to be able to help you make sure you maximize that?
This is still a journey for me. I think there's a lot that I can learn. So if anybody's listening in and like, oh, Joseph, you missed these things, please let me know. This would be something I'd love to get better at too. The two things that I think we're pretty good at, though, is watching for and managing our own reactants. There's all those analogies, like the lizard brain that kicks in, or that kind of like the bias or the immediate reaction. And I've been there. One of my earliest employees, early on, near the end of one of the work days, came into my office. I had an open door policy. Comes in, he's like, Joseph, do you have a moment? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I gotta give you some feedback. You're being a jerk. It's like, that's the first, and I mean, the immediate reaction is like, you're red in the face. Like literally, I was trying to calculate payroll, and you know how bad I am. I already mentioned that. And getting over that reactance to say, okay, this is just my body, my brain triggering immediate reactions. Now let's push that aside. I can come back to that and think about why did I feel attacked. But in the moment, what is the signal? What you're sharing with me was that although I talked about work-life balance, the reality is I was always the last one to leave the office, and everyone felt like they needed to stay so long. And the irony is he'd wait until almost 7 o'clock when I was the last one there, and he's letting me know this. So like just that idea, let's talk to you. Let's talk through how are you reacting to a situation, and how do you control that? How do you set good, healthy boundaries so you can revisit the issue and come back to it and then improve as a person? Like it's all stuff that we get from our counselors and our therapists, and that's all great. That's a tough one, and you got to get better at it over time. And it's hard to help other people with that too. So that's an ongoing development. The second thing that I think we're really good at is trying to think in advance. What is the cost of learning? And again, I wish I had this insight myself. I got this from one of our investors, many years ago. Incredibly accomplished entrepreneur, multiple companies. They sold for billions of dollars, very accomplished VC. And he was talking about one of the newest partners. And he was saying, yeah, the reality is, yeah, that's this new partner's first deal, and he's probably going to be wrong, but that's the cost of tuition. And I just sat there stunned. He's like, they just wrote a check for $5 million. And that partner was saying, that's how much it's going to cost to teach this new partner what it means to be a good VC, the cost of tuition. And that has an interesting side effect at every stage of the business. Like if someone's a brand new manager, the first time they hire someone, the first time they let someone go may not go well. Well, let's get ready for that. Let's not punish, let's not penalize. Let's actually think, what is the cost of training someone this skill? That goes from management skills, development skills, sales skills, everything along the way. And if you can actually right-size your expectations on the cost of tuition, those pain signals now don't become issues. They become data points about that learning journey and that cost of tuition. And what's really good about it is the better you get at that, the cheaper your tuition gets. And you realize you're saving money as you go through it. And so you get that at least a little bit of sliver of joy in those moments of crisis.
I love what you said there, because the 5 million, it allows people to kind of put a number or a metric to that. So they go, oh shoot, when some of our listeners, or I've been in a situation where I didn't want to invest, 40, 50K into something. And I was like, oh, you know what? But that would be able to collapse time frame so I could learn from that person's experience, et cetera, and those pain points. And like you said, solving those problems. Now I want to lean a little bit toward culture, because it sounds like you have a really beautiful, amazing culture. And I've had some people on that we talk a little bit about culture, right? They train and educate on it. However, though, what I found so interesting is that you have had 4 successful companies, and now you have a 5th one here, and you had 4 exits. And each one you focused on, like you just mentioned, those 2 focus points, those 2 hats. That's what you were wearing. Boom, you came in, this is it. This is your play. So Joseph, when you're working with a new company like Uvaro, like you're going out there, you're building this business, okay? Explain to me the kind of culture and the clarity that you have when you're integrating either the mission, the vision, solidifying that, like you said, the open door policy, making sure that these people feel valued, making sure that you have the right people on. There's a lot that goes into it. And I'd love for you to just kind of, I'll just let you go with it and just unpack it for our audience, man.
For sure. I think I've got a couple of takes on that, a couple of points that I think apply to any business. And then let me wrap up with a couple of things that I think are more about me and my companies. First off, when it comes to any business, I think a lot of people position culture leadership the wrong way. A lot of people will say the CEO needs to lead culture. Culture is led from the top. And that carries all this connotation of the CEO doing all the work. I've got a different way of phrasing and thinking about it. When I coach founders, I talk about the CEO's job is to anoint flag bearers. You need to be able to equip others to lead culture. And it's a very subtle framing. It's like, if my job's to lead culture, I'll make silly mistakes like saying, well, I've got to interview everybody for as long as I possibly can because I'm the only one who can do it. And that happens a lot. A lot of times that happens. That's a huge burden. But if you frame it around, you say, hey, my job is to anoint flag bearers. You put your work differently. Instead of saying, I'm going to run this interview, you say, hey, how can I write a really good interview guide? If I really care about integrity, how do I find probing questions so I can give someone else that guide to go and test for integrity. It's a very different framing. It's a subtle one, but a very impactful one. So one of my measures for personal success, and I ask entrepreneurs this, was what was the first hire? What was the headcount number that you didn't need to interview and it was a successful hire? We're really lucky. We managed to do that on hire number 10 with this company. I aspire to get down into the single digits, but I'm not there yet. But I talk to CEOs all the time. We're like, yeah, I interviewed every employee up until like 100, 150 employees. And I can't imagine, I can't fathom the time sink. So that's the first one that I stick with. Just that your job is to anoint flag bearers, not lead culture yourself. The second thing that we talk about is the idea of joint ownership and aspiration. So when we're talking to individuals or talking to managers, we share two things. Culture is an aspiration. So like day one, we're going to write down the company we want to be, the kind of people we want to be, and we got to hold each other accountable to get there. And everybody who joined the company, their job is to make sure we do that, hold us accountable. It's a lot easier if you're open to feedback, if you're open to those paid signals. But yeah, like every company, every leader is going to get to the point where someone says, we're not living our company values. It's not a failure. It's like you're growing quickly, you're hiring people, maybe you haven't communicated well, it's going to happen. Well, that's everybody's responsibility. It's not just the CEO. I've got to equip people, but we all got to have that conversation. And I think those two things, if they apply to every company, and if you can bake them in, you'll be really successful. For us, our founding team, the thing that we've done that's a little bit different, and I don't think this works for everybody, but it really works for us, is we believe that our values need to be paramount. So we actually wrote our values before we wrote our vision and our mission. And when we think about everything else, our competencies, our skills, what we're hiring for, our interview guides, everything folds up into those values. And we actually positioned all of our values in pairs. It's really easy to say something like honesty is a big value for us. But if you take that to the extreme, I could say something like, oh, hey, Christian, I think that last podcast was really crap. Oh, I'm just being honest. Just being honest. And that's not helpful. That's not good. So we always have them in balance. So for us, one of our company values is honesty and empathy. And we talk about it's a lot easier to walk a mile in someone else's shoes if you're honest about the size of your feet. And by putting them in pairs, it fosters more thoughtful discourse about what those values actually mean.
That is brilliant. I have never heard that. That is so interesting to me in regards to so honesty and empathy. And if you could just maybe give us another example of one of your values in congruency like that.
Yeah, play and responsibility. So a lot of companies will say, we love play. We have fun. We do lunches. We do barbecues. Rah, rah, rah. Hot swag, fanny packs for everybody. Or they say, hey, we're responsible. We watch for security. We do our passwords. And these are like two different things. Well, what we realized is that, if you actually take care of your responsibilities, there's more room for creativity and freedom. If anybody runs a software company, they'll totally get this. If you have really good tests, you can build software faster and release quicker, and it's just more fun. Another example that comes to mind is we have an unlimited time off policy. We say, hey, everyone's an adult, be an adult. However, a lot of people are actually bad at doing what they know they need to do. So we augmented that with a minimum time off policy. And we actually report on all our managers, like, did your team take enough time off? And so we have both a minimum, but also an unlimited policy. And if you take care of that responsibility, then everything else becomes way easier. It's much more fun when you know that things don't fall apart behind you.
Now, I've heard that actually. I've heard a lot of people start doing that, implementing that. However, though, I'm always intrigued because I do know, that billionaire the guy that owns Virgin Islands and all that fun stuff.
Yeah,
Virgin,
Richard Branson.
brand. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
He did that in his company, and one of the things that I was curious on, and I kind of did a little bit of research on, is he also has a really filtering process on the front end for the hiring as well, making sure that that person is a value of hitting those criteria, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious with you to develop that, because that's a beautiful thing, and I definitely see the value of it. But I'm just curious, to prevent people taking advantage of it, do you have some sort of filter process on the front end that is more strenuous to be able to identify those kind of people, or is it more of just like a trust basis?
I suppose a little bit of both, a little bit of neither. We have a very rigorous hiring process. We take culture so seriously. We have a very thoughtful, very effective hiring process. Uh, it's something I think we do very well. We get a lot of compliments from candidates, even people we don't hire, about the hiring process itself. So, I mean, if I could trust the data, I think that's a good sign. Uh, and so I suppose you could say it's rigorous, but it's not that we filter a lot of people. We're just really careful about the people we first start to bring into an interview and how we navigate along. Um, the way we manage it, though, like managing that risk, there's a couple of ways. I mean, the first off is like most companies at scale, you're going to have an ATS, you're going to have an HRIS, you're going to have systems to try and log. So you can report and see if there's any worrying trends. But the bigger thing, when people say, hey, take advantage of it, what they're usually worried about is someone who's hiding in the organization. Like they're not really they're just kind of phoning it in. They're not really contributing. They're half-assing it. They're like the negative term of like quiet quitting or however you want to phrase it. And the reality is time off isn't the only way that someone hides. They could just be in the office all the time and spending the entire time on like Reddit. And so a large part is when we design roles, when we say, hey, we're going to hire for this role, we make the manager put in the effort up front to say, how do I know this role will be successful? What are the KPIs that it's accountable for? If anybody's read Traction, the EOS model, they've got that really easy adage of like every role has a single number. You could be as specific as that, or you could have a multitude of KPIs. But if you don't know what to measure, there's no way to know if a role is successful, whether the person's in the office or not. And so we think that's the first step. And then if those KPIs are being hit, like candidly, if somebody hit all the KPIs that are accountable for the role and they take 3/4 of the year off, great. That is an incredible hire. We should pay them more. Like,
I love it. So really what the way you structure it is, like you said, taking ownership and making sure that that individual is very clear and very simple, simplify and very clear on their KPIs or their role, their what they need to take ownership of. Now, my question though is when you are working internally, not talking about you and the employees to the employees, and you got maybe the C-suite, CMO just doesn't get well with the CFO, or the CFO doesn't get well with the CTO, or whatever it may be, right? And what I'm always intrigued with, Joseph, is do you rely, because I've seen a lot of people kind of heading a little bit more toward personality tests, how to respond or engage with other people that have maybe different personalities. And because we talk about in a company, in a culture, we want diversity, but also we want inclusion. But then there's this difference of an opinion that causes this convergence, right? Or divergence, I should say. Divergence, that's just this back and forth. But we want both. But in order to do that, you also need that culture. And so I'm always intrigued how it is almost like an art and a science a little bit. So when you're working with, your team, and I'm not just talking about you and your team, it's the team versus the team, right? And how to make sure that, hey, there's lack of miscommunication, or hey, how do I approach this confidently with this CFO or CTO or CMO, whoever it may be that I'm discussing. So how do you integrate that into the DNA of the company?
totally. And this is going to sound glib, but it comes down to executing culture well. But let me explain that. Let me unpack that. So I'm not just that jerk on the podcast saying, oh, yeah, just do things perfect. I mentioned earlier about how, so we have what's called a strategy pyramid. That's what we use. The top is our values, our vision, our mission are below that. Our strategic plan rolls up into that. Our 3-year goals and then our quarterly goals all roll up into that. The meaning behind the pyramid is that everything has to support, but also every layer above supersedes what we're doing. So the interesting things that are in there is policies are nowhere in the pyramid. Like we shouldn't be doing things just because of policy. The policy serves goals, it serves a strategy. The goals that we're working on does not supersede our vision, our mission, nor our values. So an easy way, and we say this to everybody who joins our company, if you're ever in a conflict position, if you make your decisions and act according to the values, you can't be fired. The flip side, though, is if you're contravening the values, like the most important thing in the company, that is a fireable offense. To your specific example, the third set of our values is diversity and solidarity. We get every voice we can to make sure we make the right decisions, and then we commit wholeheartedly to the decision to give it the best chance to succeed. If we learn new information, we'll change course, but we need people's buy-in and commitment. Now, that's an easy thing to say. It's a hard thing to execute day to day, so you got to roll that down. I mentioned earlier how we even roll our skills or competencies into it. When we defined our leadership skills, and if anybody's out there looking for like really good examples of leadership skills and frameworks, Amazon has an incredible set. I don't agree with all of them, but it's very well articulated. Great reference. When we developed ours, our set of 10, we said, hey, what are the core skills we need to have to support each of our values? So kind of lined up all four. Within that honesty and empathy, one of the specific skills in there is communicate empathetically. And we broke it down. Like, how do you know someone's communicating empathetically? Like, what are the behaviors that demonstrate like someone who's early on their career versus somebody who's at the pinnacle of that skill? And that's what drives our performance reviews. Or even our performance review process is all driven by those values, because that's what makes sure that we can work together. We could do the right thing. And all those hard skills, like, can you program? Can you market? Can you graph? Like, you can train that stuff. Everything else is really hard.
What was the time in your career that you would say you did this wrong? And obviously, because all the stuff you're saying, it makes perfect sense. And it's very unorthodox compared to some. And I love how you prioritize values over anything else. I think that's really awesome. But I just love to get like an example for contextual for our audience. So they're like, oh, he's not perfect, right? He messed up. And then, obviously this is a good learning experience. So
I mean, totally. Like, if I think about the earliest stages of my career, I've always tried to roll out simple prototype versions of this. Like, think back, what started me as an entrepreneur? I was like, I saw a really crappy cultural experience. I'm like, I want to do better. So like, I've always been thinking about this, but our first versions were really terrible. Like, in one of our first companies, we didn't articulate it in the form of a set of cultural values. We actually articulated it in the form of high-level policy statements, which then got turned into more structured policies. So for example, one of the first policies we wrote, shortest policy document I have ever written, more fun equals more good, was the policy. I was like, let's make sure we're having more fun. And like, through that process, that's where I realized that wasn't robust enough thinking. I mean, it's a great thing to put up on the wall, a great thing to talk about people when you're interviewing people that get really excited, but it's actually hard to evaluate and measure and judge that. And a really good example, we did not have these things sorted out. And one of our first hires at that company, sales rep, was my best friend at the time, my roommate, wicked smart individual. But I didn't have a good, solid understanding of how to communicate empathetically, how to be empathetic to his work. And I remember one of those, it's so cringeworthy. It feels like something out of a TV show. Like, we wanted him to sell and talk about the product one way. And like, literally I said something to the effect of like, no, you got to sell it this way because I'm the boss and I call the shots. And then shortly after that, of course, like, he stopped coming into work, and we're still roommates at the time. And I didn't properly check in to see what's happening until eventually he just didn't show up anymore and we just didn't pay him anymore. And like, oh my God, it's so terrible. But going through that process, it was also very humbling, realizing like, wow, I got that really freaking wrong. I got to do better at that in the future. And yeah, there were early versions, early prototypes, and I think we've gotten better every step of the way.
yeah, it's just constantly optimizing. But I appreciate you sharing and being authentic and sharing that with our audience, because we all learn and we all figure it out. I've done it very similar. So my next question with this. So when you are building this synergistic relationship, like you mentioned, how do we take what we talked about, right, and actually integrate it into the DNA of the company? Because at some point, when you're running an 8-9 figure, you got other people that are hiring and they're taking ownership, right? And so you want to make sure that, hey, I'm not able to talk or have those performance reviews, or maybe my C-suite, they're not able to do the performance reviews because maybe they have their team is so big, they have mid-tier managers or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are people that listen to this podcast that are in that situation, right? So my question is, how do you make sure that you do not lose the integrity of that culture as you're in growth stage of that phase of company?
I mean, you're asking the toughest question. I mean, as a CEO, as a founder, your job is to make the processes and systems that let you scale your culture, your company. And so it's tough. It's not easy. I'll share what we do, and I think it works well. But for anybody that's listening in, like, this is tough and it's going to be hard, especially if you're a remote workforce, because like a lot of things you get for free, like the water cooler talks, the all hands meeting in the boardroom, you don't have those in a remote first company. So there's some tough things. When we first started doing this, it's like the very first time we tried to apply this model was with my last company. And we had the advantage of being an HR technology company. Our goal was build an HR system where your file felt less like a secret government file about you and more like your social media profile. You choose who you invite in, you take it with you. We had really good success there, but we pioneered something really different there. So this is back in the early 2000s. The idea was every piece of recognition you get, every goal you work on, every note that gets put on your HR file should have the option to get associated with your company values. Super, super powerful stuff. So like if I say, hey, Christian, thanks for helping me out with that, it's asking me which company values did Christian exhibit? If I'm putting a note or you're working on a goal, we're actually identifying what values. So everything that happened was tied to the values. They made it real easy when you come to performance review time. I mean, you could even run reports like who was the champion for our values. One of our values at the time was badassery. We used a Batman icon and we could see who was the most badass. What's really cool is those ideas are baked into a lot of HR systems right now. Like there are apps you can put into your Slack environment. So if you give someone recognition or kudos, you can tag with values. There's performance management tools like Lattice, where same thing, you can define the values. And so a quick, easy one is use tools that have a values, a culture orientation. I don't mean only culture. There are apps that are just about like build culture, and that's hard to make it into your day-to-day process. It's got to be like where you book vacation, where you do the performance review, all that. But if you can actually weave your values into the day-to-day actions, that's profoundly powerful. Second thing you got to do is you got to celebrate your champions. This is going to sound really silly, but damn, it's powerful. Every year, choose one employee who best exhibited each value. Give them a trophy, give them a prize, put their name on a plaque that sits on the wall that everybody always sees. Like, who is the best living example of those values, and celebrate it. The last piece, though, you had that idea of like checking in on kind of skip levels and things like that, is you need to stop trusting blindly into the reporting structure. I'm sure everybody who listens in has great leaders, great managers, great middle managers. But if you blindly trust that org structure, you run the risk of isolated silos of negativity. Let's imagine, let's thought exercise. Let's imagine you've got a VP who just has a subtly different idea of what honesty and empathy means or what badassery means. If you rely on that evaluation process, their perspective will supersede anything you try and say from the top. So a couple of things you could do to mitigate that, like skip level interviews are a great process. So that's a quick, easy example. Voluntary mentorship programs, until our company got to about 50 employees, it was actually mandatory. Every employee we paired with a mentor who was an executive in a different part of the org. We do it voluntarily now because we're bigger, but that builds cross-departmental linkages. And then we actually have someone that we engage whose job is just to go and get to know everybody regularly. And we run meetings and sessions, just coffee dates, and it's all anonymous. They're not allowed to tell us who they talk to about what, but their job is to identify trends or patterns. People are feeling more lonely, or there's this thing that felt like it violated the values, or there was this thing that's not sitting right, and to bring them back up to us. And that lets you both make sure that you don't have silos, that you've got interdepartmental connective tissue, but then you've got something to hold yourself accountable. It's kind of like auditing your culture. And yeah, as you get to scale, all of those people ops and HR hires can feel more expensive. But seriously, like if you get it wrong, what's the cost of tuition? Hey, like a fractional headcount, a full-time headcount, small way to make sure that your culture stays intact.
So this is actually a really interesting point because I see, and they call them like a therapist or a psychologist. They come along for like sports teams, so that person for those teams can, I mean, those players, because there's a lot of under stress or whatever, and so they can come in and they talk whatever, and it helps them mentally, right? There's that mental health that's associated with that. And I like what you're saying in regards to this. This may not be a therapist or a psychologist, however, though it is someone that is designated on the team to go in there and just have coffee and meet up and chat with these individuals and love on them. And what kind of person, if you could describe it, because I love this strategy and it's something that I've not have actually thought about implementing into a business structure, but I love that. It's almost like the same thing that we always, have a customer success manager to manage our clients so that we can engage and stay intact. We got to do the same thing and be intentional. But I love now, is that more of an HR director position, or is it more of someone that, what does that look like a little bit, Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, the role very much needs to be like an individual contributor. Like there's no capacity to think about you. Imagine trying to, on the one hand, design a performance management process or a compensation plan, and then flip over and saying like, "Hey, like Kathy or Jim, how you doing?" I mean, like, if you're responsible for both of those, every conversation you have, you're going to be worried about like, is this a good use of my time? I got to be doing this other really strategic thing. So it needs to be somebody who's actually just focused on that. And even if it's a fractional hire, their only work with you can be focused on this. A lot of the characteristics, a lot of the skills are a lot like counseling and therapy because they got to be focused on the individual. The most important thing, though, is they have to have very, very high integrity and an employee centric perspective because they can't provide feedback from the perspective of like, how do we manage or police our employees? It needs to be, here's what the employees need. And if people lose that trust, if the employees lose faith that that person is representing their best interests, the whole system breaks down. So yeah, like your comment is like, hey, hiring a coach or a psychologist or like a therapist, it is very, very similar. The one thing that we do, like we actually talk about this internally, is we say they're not a therapist and they're not a counselor because you should have that person already. And that person shouldn't have any risk of like the company's agenda. They should just be in your court. So yeah, we could talk about it. There's a lot of similarities, but we still always advocate people should have their own, their person in their own corner who's got their back.
And I like how you differentiated that. And I really appreciate you explaining that. It's not a therapist. You have your own. However, this is just someone to talk to just to get a heartbeat of where people are. And like you said, I think people, it's so funny. Well, we talk about vulnerability and authenticity, but when it's all of a sudden like, oh, my boss won't know that I'm going to say this. Okay, cool. Then I will actually tell you what I'm truly thinking sometimes. And that's okay. That's why you want to make sure they're in an environment where they feel comfortable to do so. I've seen that where it's, in fact, I've been in meetings where I actually remove myself and I have my sales guy or another person in that. Then all of a sudden people start chatting and start all of a sudden giving also, and they record it. I watch that later because my presence sometimes obviously is more dominating. So anyways, I get where you're coming
Totally.
from. I think
Yeah.
that's very, very valuable. Now I wanted to talk about your company here, Uvaro, your tech sales training. This has actually helped hundreds of people upgrade their career and step into tech in the sales industry. And so I want to talk a little bit about obviously the platform that you built, and
Mhm.
then as well as some case studies that you have seen, and just incredible momentum that you guys got going on in this industry.
Totally. I really am grateful that you asked because we have so much fun. And I love talking about our members because their journeys, like, I always get shivers talking about their journeys because it's so incredibly impactful. You're right. Like, we help people. Our wedge where we started, like at a beachhead market, was helping people transition into tech, primarily in like sales and customer service roles. Over time, we've expanded. We're now into sales management. We're in customer success. We're in a bunch of additional roles and industries, and we'll keep adding more. The big focus for us, though, it's not about the tech company or the sales role. It's about the success, the career success of the individual. And I mean, the people who are listening to the podcast, I mean, they're CEOs and their bosses, so they may not actually know what this is like, but they probably have like a kid or a cousin or a nephew or someone they went to school with who was like, I hate my job. I know I need to do something different. And they scramble around like, well, crap, I have no relevant experience, so maybe I should go temp somewhere. I don't know if this company's good, so I'm going to go ask on Reddit. And I mean, you get what you pay for in the feedback, or they hustle, they try to network on LinkedIn to find a job before it's posted, and it's a nightmare. It really is. Like, we talk about the stats, like 2.5 years average turnaround, people who graduate college, 40K in debt, all that kind of stuff. We flip the model on its head and we're like, what if you had one person, one team that you could call that could help you with that journey? It's like, you need skills for the role, they've got that. You need to get matched with the right company, they've got that. You need some evidence on your resume, so like a 3-month internship to show you could do the work, they've got that. Or like coaching, you're in the job, you hate your new boss, you're in a moment of crisis, who do they call? And that's what we do. So our members get that real-time training, coaching, job matching, and that ongoing success. And the impact's been profound. We get people who are leaving drive-through counter at McDonald's, laid off flight attendants, people who were in nursing and are tired of being threatened or worrying about their life, transitioning into roles where they get to work from home, see their family more, get hot lunches every day, double their income. It's been remarkably profound. We get customers who are crying, thanking us on the phone regularly. And all of my other companies have all been like B2B software and technology. And it's been it's been a fun transition. It's a really good change for me.
So for those that are listening, um, and many of them are in growth stage where they're constantly hiring, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of just sat here and had a conversation regarding culture. But for those that are looking to hire your specific kind of individuals, how would they go about doing that?
Totally. I mean, a cool couple of ways. If people are just looking to hire, you flip us over your job posting. We'll share it with the community. Like our customer is the individual. So happy to share your job posting and make introductions. And that's super helpful. We do that all the time. If people are looking to build a pipeline, like if a company says, hey, I just need to keep hiring sales reps, customer service reps, SDRs, AEs, we do run virtual apprenticeships for them where we'll stand up the apprenticeship, put people into the program, help match. And I mean, that is a paid service to run that program. But really, if someone's just looking to hire one or two people, flip us over the job. Happy to introduce you to our members.
And you talk a bit about sales and what's going on in this industry a little bit, and so I would love for you to just help us understand, because you mentioned they're coming from McDonald's, or they're coming from these baseline kind of companies, and then they want to get into the sales side of things. But what I always found so interesting, it is about the methodology and the system, right? The vehicle. And so Uvaro creates that amazing vehicle. So you input just a regular person, and your output a successful, very high achieving individual. And so what kind of methodology do you use to be able to facilitate that?
Well, first off, let me benchmark that because I'm sure folks are listening in and they're like, are they really more successful? Like, there's always skepticism on that kind of stuff. But when we compare our members to people who are hired by the same company at the same time, let's do that cohort comparison. On average, they're ramping to productivity in a third the time, and they're twice as likely to exceed quota. So by most objective measures, they're a higher performing sales professional. So I'll get that out of the way. The interesting thing, we had this unfair advantage, I got to say. When we started this company, we did not start it as a training and a career success company. We started it as a software company. Like, how do we help people onboard at companies faster? And we built chat-based, AI-powered cheat sheets, all the buzzwords for raising venture capital you can find. And we made really cool enablement tools. And all of our best customers, the ones who loved the software, used it the most, grew the most, bought more, were simultaneously complaining about hiring trainers and being disappointed, and hiring recruiters and being disappointed. And we're like, wow, that's a shame. These great companies, they just hate this training and hiring thing. Maybe we can do something on the side to help them. So we said, let's run some workshops. We have all of this sales training and enablement data. We know what's working at the best companies. Let's run some open workshops. We had 800 sales professionals from other industries apply to get into tech. And we're like, oh my goodness, this has got to be a real company. So we spun it up as a side project, and then the pandemic hit and it became the business. So we had this ream of data, and the data told us three things. The first is that it doesn't matter what sales methodology you have. The bigger issue is, do the people stick to the methodology? So challenger sales, spin selling, any of those, it doesn't matter which one you have as much as do your people follow it. So the first top skill that we work on and we train is process adherence. And like, oh, wow, people who came out of hospitality, who came out of like travel, like any kind of safety oriented business, understand sticking to process. The second thing that popped out was that the ability to empathize with the customer, the person on the other end of the phone, is super important. And I don't mean, are you charismatic? Are you charming? Do you have a good smile? Do you have a nice camera for your webcam? What I mean is, can you genuinely feel the pain that that person has and sit in it and actually make that call of like, I can help fix that pain or not? Because if you can't fix the pain, it's a waste of their time. And if you actually empathize that, you don't want to waste their time. So that idea of empathy, process-driven empathy. And then the third one was grit, the ability to pick yourself back up when you get knocked down. And anybody that's in sales role is not going to be surprised at all that. What's really interesting, though, is that that stuff comes out like crazy in the service industry, in retail sales, in all of these really tough roles, like bartenders. Can you imagine working 3 years, every Friday night, Saturday night, worried, is there going to be a fight? Like, damn, there's a lot of grit out there that gets missed when a tech company says, I want to hire the charismatic team sports player from the college. Like, there's so much more opportunity out there. And so we get to see that every day.
But I like what you're doing in this in regards to it is because it's very unorthodox. And why I'm saying that is because we see so many times where there's all these high level sales trainings, right? Quote unquote. And the reality is that as long as you have these characteristics, and sadly, okay, a lot of companies, we think, oh, we need someone with this kind of criteria. Oh, a high level sales, they've done high ticket sales before, they've done this. But the reality, what you just mentioned, those three attributes, those three characteristics, they come from different industries.
Mhm.
And you may be surprised, like you just mentioned, that bartender, holy crap, that's very, very great. But they're just in the wrong vehicle. And that bartender's looking for a new vehicle, which is this, and they already have those characteristics that they can obviously facilitate and just really grow. And I love what you said as well. It's not a matter of what mythology, as long as it's a mythology and it's consistent. I think that's just
Totally. Like the
love
one
that.
thing to any leader that's listening, like the one thing that you can do that's going to pay dividends is like audit your screening interviews. I'm going to share an anecdote with a VP of sales we had early in the Uvaro journey. We talked about these incredible people, and we teed it up. I was like, "Hey, I've got a candidate I want to introduce you to." Okay, this guy's got 3 years selling door to door in Winnipeg, in Canada. And for people who don't know, the winter there is bitter, painfully, your nose fall off cold. So door to door sales outside, okay, there's grit. Had 2 years straight, averaging 300% of quota. Like, wow, like selling 3 times what his quota was. He is new to software as a service. And I made the introduction, and I was joking at the time. Like and I totally screwed up this introduction because I was like, hey, this guy's an incredible sales professional. He's got the grit. I know he's going to be a great cultural alignment. And the interesting thing is, all he needs is a little bit of coaching around the edges. Because when we asked him, why do you want to join Uvaro? His answer immediately was, I can't wait to get an SaaS job. Now, for those in the industry, like, we say SaaS or we'll say software as a service industry. That VP of sales, you know what he said? He goes, if he said that in the first interview, he wouldn't have a second interview. Like, what the heck? You're screening candidates on saying SaaS as opposed to saying SaaS. And I bet there's very, very few CEOs or founders who would say that's how they want to screen candidates. But if you lose touch with how your team is screening, those little cheats, those little kind of shortcuts, they weave their way in, and then you're missing so many great people and missing so many opportunities that, yeah, if you were just more specific on here's how we screen, here's what we're looking for, and here's what we don't, filter on, you're gonna have a much better team and a much better culture.
Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. And it's actually very interesting how culturally that has adjusted and changed, because there are some job things in corporate, and I'm talking large companies, billion-dollar companies, that I've seen their description, and they have changed from, you got to have a degree in XYZ to more of, hey, degree or experience, right? And like you mentioned, not even sometimes experience. Well, it is really still leveraging that, but it's the characteristics, it's the attributes more than anything else, because those skills can be leveraged. And then also, like you mentioned, does it fit culturally to the organization and the DNA of the company? So I love this. I love this conversation. Joseph, Fung, I really appreciate just having this amazing conversation, unpacking your immense valuable content that we talked about today. I mean, just also your experience in regards to culture and how you wear those two hats. And when you come into a company, that's what you're focusing on. Your co-partner obviously focus on the other things. And then as well as just the constant optimizations, but also the failures that you had to learn across the way. That one guy that was rooming up with you, just slowly, that sales guy. But I loved how you learned from that, and obviously now able to build this just beautiful streamlined system. And I know we could talk for quite a while unpacking this. Joseph, if they have more questions, or for those that are listening that want to get access to Uvaro or just be part of your ecosystem, how can they reach out to you, my man?
Oh man, people can reach out to me on social media. I'm at Joseph Fung on most things, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, but you can always also hit us up at Uvaro, UVARO.com. We make most of our content open, available. So feel free to hit us up, leverage any of it, and I hope anybody listening in has incredible career success.
And guys, those links will be in the description below. So make sure you stop what you're doing. And, if you're looking for some high caliber individuals that have those characteristics, those attributes, make sure you just fall into that, into his ecosystem. So that link is in the description. And Joseph, again, I just appreciate your immense value today. I always love to ask my guests before I let you go, is there any last words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience?
I'm hoping it's not a surprise to anyone and that they've already done this, but if you haven't already, you gotta write down your culture, your values, because the moment you write it down, you can start sharing it with others and attract more of the right people to you. So write it down, manifest it, and build the culture that you want.
And that is the CEO and founder of Uvaro, my friend Joseph Fung. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.
Yo, this is Christian D. Evans, Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. We thank you so much for listening to this amazing episode. If you feel and you know that this was valuable to you, please show some love to our amazing guest by liking this, by commenting on this, by making sure that you do a nice 5-star review and just show some love to our guest. That'd be really awesome. Also, make sure you share this with a friend, a family, a colleague, someone that you believe would bring value to their life right now. And guys, we just want to say thank you again for just being part of our community. If you want to have more resources, don't be afraid. Go to christiandevans.com. You can actually schedule a phone call with me, or you can send me an email at christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. That's christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. Always love to hear some feedback and let me know what is the number 1 or 2 things that you are struggling in your business and your life, and we'll make sure we have those conversations. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast, and until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can. Cheers.